Here we have the long-awaited unboxing and first look at Sony's new HDR-CX900 Handycam. This is the sister or brother product to Sony's new AX100, which is their much touted 4K Handycam. The CX900 here is identical in pretty much all respects, except that it doesn't shoot 4K. But as far as I can tell from reading the manual online, every other aspect of the camcorder is pretty much the same. It's the top end of their consumer camcorder line, currently costs around £1,300 here in the UK. And the AX100, I think the 4K model, costs about £400 more. The usual stuff at the top of the box, it's some bits of bump about what else you can buy for it, plus the user manual, basic user manual in several different languages. Don't need that. I've already read the user manual online. This appears to be yet more versions of the same thing. And notice how the manuals are all referring to the 4K version as well as the HD version, another indication that the two camcorders are in fact very, very similar, apart from this one not doing 4K. And if you're wondering why I went for this one and not the 4K one, I'm just not ready to leap into the 4K world yet. I'll need a faster computer, I'll need to upgrade all my monitors. I don't know anybody who's watching 4K, so for the moment HD will do fine. There's the camcorder itself as usual, and here some accessories, starting with a USB, that is also USB, so that's USB lead, fine. That's an HDMI, full-size HDMI to mini HDMI, getting pictures off the camcorder. Some sort of power supply. Notice, as usual these days, that's not actually a battery charger, it is simply a power supply, which that end will then go into the camcorder, so you can charge the battery on the camcorder, but not while the battery is off the camcorder, which is a shame. That's a mains lead, standard UK mains lead to go into the other end of that charger. What else we got in here? A remote control. Do you know, I do still like having a physical remote control to operate a camera. I know that all the modern camcorders have got Wi-Fi and you can control them from your smartphone. It's just not as easy and not the same as having a physical remote control which you can press buttons on. So I'm very pleased about that. Thank you, Sony. Must be a battery in here somewhere. I think this is it. I have rarely seen a camcorder battery quite so small as that. That is an official Sony, what do they call it? Infolithium NP-FV50. And even just looking at it, I think it's safe to say the first thing I'll want to do with this camcorder is go and buy another battery, a bigger battery as well, because that, I'm guessing that'll last about half an hour in real terms. But anyway, at least they've provided a battery to get us started. And that's a lens cap, not lens cap, lens hood. Yes, simply a lens hood. It's not actually a cap like the ones you get on the Canon cameras where there's a flap to cover the lens actually built into the lens hood. But anyway, there we go. Let's have a look at the camcorder itself. This is, for consumer camcorders, this is a big beast. In fact, gosh, that is quite large indeed. Let's just move this box out of the way. So there is the camcorder. It's quite chunky. Let me show you by way of comparison. A standard off-the-shelf point-and-shoot kind of camcorder you might take on holiday would be something like this. No manual controls really, just point and shoot. And there's the Sony. Look at that. The Sony really is quite large. By way of other comparison, I've got a Canon XA20 here. Let's try and put them together like that. Now, they are roughly the same size. And of course, if you imagine taking the handle off the XA20, that would be the same size as the Canon HFG30, which is Canon's top-end consumer model. So in fact, the Canon is about the same size as the Sony, really. But that gives you an idea of how bulky it is. Flip out screen, obviously. Lots and lots of buttons. There are three things, you know, that stand out to me about this camcorder, both from having browsed its specifications, read the manual, and just looking at it now. And three things occur to me. Firstly, very unusually for Sony in their consumer line, this camcorder has a lot of manual controls, because conventionally on Sonys, you tend to find your manual control is all accessed through a touch screen, and the only physical manual control you have is a little dial on the side, like this one. But on this model, you've not only got the little dial, you've got a focus ring, you've got buttons here, you've got buttons here, you've got buttons here, you've even got a couple of additional buttons on the back as well. So for a Sony camcorder, this is very well spec'd in terms of controls for the enthusiast to be able to quickly and easily get to what they want to change. So that is good. The second thing that's unusual about this camcorder, and this applies not just to it being a Sony, but to it being a camcorder at all, is that it has a top spec shooting mode of 50 megabits a second. That's a lot of megabits. Let's have a look. This little Panasonic here, this little point and shoot, I think goes up to, it's either 18 or 24 megabits a second AVC HD. The XA20 here, that has a 35 megabits a second MP4 mode, but this will go up to 50 megabits a second. And in general terms, it is safe to say that the more megabits per second you have, that's the more data you have to capture your image, and therefore the better quality the image should be. So that's the second thing that is unusual about this camcorder, is that the bit rate at which it can shoot. I mean, I think it does fairly normal AVC HD modes as well. I should mention that top spec 50 megabit mode is in XAVCS, which is a sort of Sony invented format of H.264, otherwise known as MPEG-4. All these codecs in AVC HD, XAVC, they're all kind of the same thing, but in different formats, the way they're stored and the number of megabits they use. The other thing that's unusual about this is the image sensor, which you can't really see, but it's down there behind the lens. Most consumer camcorders, and for that matter, some broadcast camcorders, have pretty small image sensors. The image sensor being the device that actually picks up the light that is focused onto it through the lens and converts it into electrical signals that are then recorded. And this has a 1-inch sensor. That inch is actually measured diagonally across the sensor. But for comparison, again, this little Handycam here, I think has something like a 1/6 inch sensor. The Canon XA20 HFG30 has a 1/3 inch sensor. Even professional broadcast camcorders like Sony's PMW 200, the old EX1s, they have 1/2 inch chips. This thing's got a 1-inch chip in it. And why is that important? A couple of reasons. The bigger the chip, the bigger the pixels on it, and therefore the better able they should be to capture light. So in low light situations, a bigger chip generally should do better than a smaller chip. So this ought to be good in low light. But the other thing about big chips, and the reason why digital stills cameras, the DSLRs, have been so popular for filming of late, is that a bigger chip helps you get a shallower depth of field. In other words, that sort of blurry look in the background while your subject stays in focus. And so I think what Sony have done here is they've acknowledged that a lot of people have wanted to shoot on DSLRs because of the lovely image quality, but they acknowledge that DSLRs are not ergonomic for filming. I mean, they're horrible in terms of actually trying to hold them and operate them while you're trying to film video. So Sony have put a DSLR sensor into a Handycam form factor, which obviously you can hold nice and easily. You've got a proper zoom rocker, you've got access to all the controls you want. It's designed for filming to give you the best of both worlds. You should get the nice images you'd get out of a DSLR with the ease of use of a camcorder. So again, on paper at least, this camcorder ought to be an absolute winner. I think I'm right in saying that the sensor in here is the same one as in Sony's, let me get this right, it's the RX10, either the RX10 or the RX100, possibly even both. But both of those are stills cameras which do video and are well regarded for it. So this should do good video. Now I realise I haven't actually done a little look round the camcorder, so let's just quickly go through it. There's a nice big focus ring at the front. That's got a very nice smooth action. It can be toggled between focus and zoom using this little switch here. That's zoom, and down is focus. Autofocus, manual focus button if you just want to quickly have the camera having a go at it. Although I hear, and we will test this later, that the autofocus is pretty slow on this model. Down here, this control dial, which would typically be used for exposure. So you'd focus there and expose perhaps with your thumb there. Manual button to put it into manual exposure, and having done so, you then have individual control over your iris, your gain or your ISO in stills camera terms, and also your shutter speed. Generally speaking, I leave shutter speed on 1/50th and muck about with the iris and gain to get the effect I want, because if you start playing with shutter speed, you start getting unusual looking video, either blurry or staccato. Inside there is a touch screen. I haven't got the battery in now, so I can't really show you that, but it'll be all the usual stuff between switching between video mode and stills mode and playback mode and that kind of thing. More buttons in here: power on off, display presumably on off, or perhaps brightness to save power, don't know, haven't looked at that bit yet. White balance button, so you can set a custom white balance. Night shot mode for those infrared covert surveillance type shots. Programmed auto exposure mode. All the camcorders have something like this where they've pre-programmed modes for you to have different styles of shooting in. There's a single card slot, so no dual card recording here, just the one SDXC card. And it is an SDXC. I think it has to be an SDXC, at least for the high bitrate modes. Behind a little shutter here, which has got quite a nice little moulded bit of plastic here for you to get your nail into to flip it open. That's the HDMI out. There's a headphone out here for a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. This button here, which has a little picture of a face, sort of with a speech bubble coming out of it, is a rather cunning recording mode, which I'll be interested to test, but I don't have much faith in at this point, which is designed, supposedly, to minimize the amount of speech you get from the person holding the camera. This is the microphone here, 5.1 channel surround mic, and I think if you press this button, it's supposed to cleverly ignore the speech coming from behind the camera. So if the camera person's jabbering away, it ignores that and concentrates on what it's filming. Yeah, we'll see how good that is. Little loudspeaker there. Well, I think that's a loudspeaker. It's either that or a cooling vent. And that's a little playback button. Viewfinder here, which I believe pulls out. Oh, there we go. Does it tilt? It does tilt. Pulls and tilts. There we go. I imagine even if you had a large-ish battery here, you should still be able to get your eye up to the viewfinder without too much trouble. Push that away. There's a little cold shoe slot here, but it's hidden away behind this hatch and very recessed and designed really for Sony proprietary accessories. You wouldn't be able to slide any normal accessory in there because there's this little cutout in the cold shoe that enables you to drop things in and then slide them along, and most things don't have that, but presumably Sony accessories do also. It's not strictly a cold shoe, it's a hot shoe, because there are, and I don't know if you can see those there, electrical pins at the base of it. So, for example, Sony sell an XLR microphone module which slots on the top to give you pro-style XLR mics, and they connect directly into the camcorder through the pins without any trailing leads to plug in to a mic socket. But it's there, and I suppose it's good that we have it. Zoom rocker, photo button next to the zoom rocker, that's fairly traditional. Here, this switch turns the camcorder from full auto to manual controls. Usually on Sony camcorders, full auto means auto. When you go to manual, it doesn't actually make everything necessarily manual. It means you can now switch those things to manual. So for example, in manual mode, you could still have the focus in autofocus and the exposure in auto exposure. But switching to manual gives the option of turning things to manual control. Very unusually for a small camcorder, you've got switchable ND filters, neutral density filters, for when you're filming in bright light. Switch in the little sunglasses for the camera, as it were. 3 ND filters and an off setting, which is good. DC input, which hinges rather nicely using that power adapter here. So you just plug that in there to charge the battery, and obviously a start-stop recording button. And that looks like a switch between photo and video mode button. On the right here, not a lot to tell you about. You've got, I rather like this feature, a little USB connection built into the camcorder there for transferring your footage off, and it slides into this little custom slot on the side of the strap there. 2 more flip out sockets here. That one is, what is that? It says it's multi, some sort of multi connector out. AV, I presume, if you don't want to use the HDMI, and then here that's a 3.5mm microphone input for an external microphone. There's a focus magnifier button on this side next to the focus ring, so that when you are trying to zoom in and get focus, press that and it will give you on the screen a magnified image of what you're looking at. That magnified image doesn't get recorded, but you can see it all blown up, so you can be absolutely sure you're in focus. Now the weird thing about that is that when you put your hand in there, there isn't the cat's chance of you actually getting your hand on it using that hand, which is how I would normally like it. You have your hand doing the focus here and then a button here to give you expanded focus. I think the theory is that because you'll have your hand over here, you'll be able to reach over and press that focus button like that. So I'm not even sure I can demo that, but let's assume you were doing that. Press the button for focus, focus it, and press it again. So I sort of see Sony's logic in that, but it's possibly slightly awkward. I might have preferred to have that up here on that finger, for example, but I'll see how we go with that. And yeah, tripod screw obviously underneath, battery release underneath. Nothing unusual about either of those. And on the front, slightly ashamed to have a sort of clip-off lens cap, because these kind of loose things are easy to lose or put down somewhere and put in your pocket. You forget where it is till a week later. Never mind. The Canon camcorder like this one actually has a little lens cap built into the lens hood, which is quite good. I'd rather Sony had done something like that, but we'll live with that. And this here, that's either infrared for the remote control, or that's an infrared light for the night shot mode. I'm not quite sure which. As you can tell, I am pretty fresh to this camcorder. I haven't had it out of the box and played with it yet or anything, so I'm still not 100% sure what that is and one or two of the buttons, but we'll find out, and we'll have a play with it and do some tests. Anyway, that's the unboxing and first look. I'll now run some quick tests. The downside, of course, of putting any test videos on YouTube is that because of compression on the internet, you don't really get the benefit by looking at those videos on YouTube of what the quality actually looks like. So I think the tests I will run with this and show you now will be more sort of operational tests of how well it focuses, what the zoom is like, how well the camcorder copes with high contrast scenes, things like that that you can actually see on YouTube, notwithstanding all the compression. And hope that will be useful to you. So let's go and play with this camcorder.